Welcome, everyone. We have another episode of Led by Life. We're your host. I'm Rafaela, and this is Hannah. Hannah and I are going through it right now.
We just took like a half hour to set up, and we got our microphones and the Zoom and the cameras and our phones on tripods to try and capture it all. And then it just wasn't working, was it?
No,
No.
it wasn't. It did not hit the standard of perfection that we were looking for.
And I had my phone on my tripod and I was trying to adjust it, and it flung off the tripod and it hit my coffee and spilled my coffee everywhere. And I just got so angry. And I said to Rafa, this is the manifest anger when something gets in the way of what you want to do and disrupts your flow is so real. And it's just like this heat, this rage, anger within me. I feel okay now, but oh my gosh. It's really interesting. Spilling stuff is very triggering for me because I've always spilt stuff throughout my life. I've been a self-proclaimed spiller. And I think that perhaps as a child, or I don't really know what happened, but I think I used to get in trouble, or it was a big fuss if I spilt things, other people would make a fuss of it. And then, so there's a part of me that every time I spill something still kind of feels a little bit like, I'm really hard on myself. I'm really self-critical. And yeah. So that was a little bit of a double whammy, a bit of a anger for what happened getting in my flow. And then also just this feeling of yeah.
It's just absolutely so wild to me how something so frustrating, so just in the way has actually beautifully put us right on course. And I only say that because we're on Gene Key 18, day 18, and when reading about this and taking in the information from it, it talks about the sort of patterns or experiences that have happened in childhood that have these different cycles that they go through, and hopefully by the third cycle they're worked through so that you can more easily go into adulthood without carrying the stuff from the first two cycles of life, first two 7-year cycles of life.
Yeah. And so what was your feeling reading that bit? Because for me, I was like, oh shit. I don't think I did really have that nurtured in my childhood.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the wounds that you then carry into adulthood that I feel like I've actually been processing and working through over the last 18 months since discovering human design.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, I have to read this because where is it? It says, oh, I found it. So the 18 is connected to the 58, which Hannah has. And so here you and I make up another channel, and it's the channel of judgment. And it says that the channel of judgment's underlying purpose is a purpose of human design, to reclaim or recover the joy and love that have been lost in living a homogenized conditioned life.
Oh my gosh. I feel that in my heart. Yeah. It's sorry, I got distracted by my cat making some noises, but it is a healing process, isn't it? like
Yeah.
through recognizing these parts of us that are so innate that perhaps haven't been nurtured and have instead been homogenized and have been told, dictated how they should be instead of nurtured for the way that they are.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so like in this energy of gate 18, being the gate of correction, and it's the shadow of, I'm not remembering what it is.
Oh,
Judgment. Right. Okay. Yeah. I had a feeling, but I didn't realize that the shadow and the gate were named similarly. Anyway, so it's sort of like this energy of being able to pick out like what's like imperfect or not correct or not really upholding to like the highest good for the individual within their lives. And again, through like maybe these homogenized patterns through childhood and then going on. And it says these things of like the person who has this energy in their hologenetic profile, that they essentially go on through life kind of having to constantly go back and like rework with these childhood experiences to further the healing, but ultimately like that's also a healing for humanity. And I just felt like throughout everything that I was taking in with this energy, I felt like myself was being reflected back to me, because so I have the 18th gate defined, right? And I was just like in awe, because I remember saying to somebody at one point that, and I might have even said this on the podcast before, that I don't necessarily sit here and try to be introspective or reflective with my own life, and work through these pain points and these things that I feel like I want to work through, because I'm like that self-obsessed and just want to only focus on my life. I feel like a lot of this is sort of like this motivator behind it is essentially to like help humanity. And I've said it before, but many people may know that I'm by profession a therapist, and so I have this in the fifth line. And do you know what the archetype for the fifth line is with this gate?
Tell me.
Therapy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool. Can we read it? I'd like to read it.
Yeah, read it. Let's share it.
Okay. I've got it right here. Oh, shall I read it? All right. Line 5, therapy, the strength to recognize a problem and to accept that it is beyond one's power to solve it alone. The wisdom to both seek and provide guidance, the potential for correction and judgment through relationships. Wow. So it makes me think of like judgment in a way of being like critical thinking, like thinking about what can be improved, what can be worked on. And I suppose that's one of the motivators for people to seek out therapy, is to, well, work through whatever struggles that they're facing, but also to improve themselves, to work on themselves.
Yeah. No, for sure. But, and then just speaking for myself, like, it's kind of that saying where I think that, like, if you've never been to therapy, you probably shouldn't be a therapist. That's just my opinion. And so to kind of add to what I was just speaking of like going through these different modalities or interventions, or having gone through the experience myself, and using different practices to heal certain parts that just I've known don't feel well. Like, it's just ultimately part of me is doing that so that when in working with other people, in relationship with other people, that not that I need to understand their story completely, like that's not really my responsibility, but that I kind of have like a blueprint of what it's like to navigate a human experience. It might not be the same detail, but it can be very, I can empathize, I can relate, I can sort of see where pattern, because this is part of the 18th, is kind of looking at the patterns and seeing what isn't working for someone, or for myself speaking, and find a way to like find a solution or a correction that would make it ultimately turn it into like a healthier expression or whatever.
Yeah, so interesting. The line 5, I mean, that's the helper, the heretic, the 5th line archetype. But I was also thinking it's interesting that you're a 4th line in your profile, because that is so much about relationships and connecting, empathizing, having those connections with other people. So it makes sense, doesn't it? I've been really diving into the lines in each gate as I kind of get drawn to a different one in my chart, and it's scarily accurate. And then I sometimes read some of the other lines just to kind of, let me just check I'm not, let me just check to see this feels right. And then it's like, oh yeah, that's pretty spot on. The one that I have, the line that I have. Yeah.
The other thing I'll say about it is just that it's also, it's in the spleen, so it's connected to our immune system. And a lot of so you can call it criticalness of others or patterns that aren't working of others, being in dynamics that have affected me, but then also seeing where it's like the influence of someone else or that relationship is just not the most supportive, has also directly affected my immune system and my health. And so it's just so interesting how things are so beautifully connected. I know that it's been shown that a lot of autoimmune issues can sort of have maybe a layer or a root in emotional ruptures or traumas or things that maybe haven't been the most supportive to our bodies, to our souls. And I've been there, like firsthand experience on being diagnosed in my teens, actually, with an autoimmune issue. And I proudly say that I don't have lupus anymore. Despite what some people want to phrase it as or whatever, I don't have lupus anymore. I've gone through my own therapies and different practices and things that changing things in my life that just were not working. And I feel like, I feel cured.
Wow. And I've heard that the spleen, I mean, I don't know much. I haven't done much research on the splenic center, but I've heard that it has a lot to do with like letting go of things that no longer serve you. And so I suppose that really relates to what you're saying. Even just the identification with that illness, it sounds like you've released that. You've detached from that.
And any time that I think back to experiences where maybe in retrospect, like needed to be let go of and had prolonged for a period of time, holding on to what's no longer good for me for a while, have also been periods of my life that I haven't been well physically.
Yeah. So interesting. So tell me your understanding of the splenic center, or if there's like how you resonate with this, because we haven't actually explored this yet. This is the first gate that
It
we've looked
is.
at in this center. I have a completely open spleen. I have a completely open sacral and emotional center. So this whole section of the chart for me is like wide open.
That's great.
So, I mean, I really want to like go in and learn about the completely open center here. And
Mhm.
I'll do that after. Should have done that before. But tell me about your understanding of it and how it resonates for you.
Yeah. Well, I've had some experiences and have played around a lot with like the 48th gate, which is also in the spleen, which we have touched on because there we make a channel, again, and this like and this sort of deep well, they call it the well, and well, a lot of surrender can happen there, which is so beautifully placed in a splenic center that has to do also with like um fears. So for me, I think that one of the biggest things I've taken away from working a bit with the spleen center is just probably things like surrender and not needing to like actively work on fixing the things in my life that I feel need correcting, but allowing life to sort of show me what's coming up now and take it in that approach.
Mm,
Because I could see where sometimes, like self-help isn't always self-help. It can be self-harm.
mm,
And so I think that just having a different relationship with working on healing in my
mm,
life, I would say for sure. Um, and I mean, the immune system for sure, but I feel as if when, yeah, like when I'm not trying to be the driving force of making sure that I heal all of these different things that come up in my life, ultimately, my body's also physically healthier. I'm more
mm.
well. And this hasn't really been until very recent either. So it's back to like what we were saying last week. It's just one of those things that you really have to experiment with.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's really interesting what came to me as you were saying it, talking about like self-help and this idea of like working on ourselves. I thought about perfectionism, and I feel like perfectionism is probably a part of this shadow frequency of judgment, because it's like this feeling like we're never good enough, and like constantly being not just critical of others and judgmental of others, but really critical of ourselves. And if we're talking about it from the perspective of like healing and working through these childhood traumas or wounds or whatever it is that we're carrying, deconditioning, uh, it's like letting go of perfectionism to allow ourselves. And it's funny that the highest expression is actually perfection, because perfectionism is this like lower frequency of not being good enough, never being good enough, needing to try and put on come across as perfect, but it's like a facade almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, and there's this one line that I just love so beautifully, and it goes something along the lines of like, when you're in this state, you sort of come to recognize that, like, even if it's not quote unquote perfect, yet it is all perfect.
Yes.
And there's always this like um irony with some of the energies that we've talked about, that it's like in this thing is the exact thing that we're getting away from. But I guess that's like where it becomes this acidic state, because it's like within that expression, everything that we maybe may perceive in our human's mind of not working for us is actually what transcends it to being much bigger than like we can comprehend. And sometimes when we read those things, I know you and I have talked about this before, like when we take in the acidic state, it's almost like you can't try to logically make any sense of it. You just have to take it for what it is and allow it to just unfold in your life at whatever time it wants to unfold, or if ever.
Well, it's all a frequency, right? Like all of these different energies are frequencies. And so the labels or the archetypes or the names that they've been given are just the closest thing that we can, as humans, that our human mind can kind of comprehend. And I think Richard Rudd really talks about this a lot. Like it's all about just the words that feel the closest, that kind of represent it the most. But it's a frequency.
Yeah.
And so I just love this. Like, this is why I love the Gene Keys, like feeling into the frequency of this energy that through awareness, through surrender, through experimentation, then transcends into these higher frequencies, which again, you can't really kind of define or label, but
yeah. Being somebody that has a completely open spleen, do you feel like you've had a lot of experiences with, and I don't even know if that's the way I want to say it, not a lot of experiences, but I guess what's your relationship like with fear or instincts, or the immune system? These are just some of the things that I know, like the spleen governs. So I'm wondering, with somebody with a completely open spleen, like how do you relate to these things?
Well, it might be getting a little bit muddled up with some of the frequencies of the other open centers that I have, like the sacral and the emotional solar plexus. But if I think about fear, I'm also thinking about like anxiety and worry and stress, which again, I think stress is kind of related more so to the sacral, because it's like the pressure, and maybe even the root, the pressure to do, the pressure to be like doing, this idea of stress. So I'm not sure if it's like all kind of muddled up. I probably will find a bit more clarity around how these different energy centers feel as I do more of this deconditioning work. But I would definitely say that I've picked up a lot of anxiety that's not mine throughout my life. And I think that as we're talking about health and well-being and immunity, it really is when I'm in these kind of more stressed, more feeling pressure, more feeling anxiety, and probably fearful and worry, where I do feel that my body doesn't feel as healthy. Whereas when I'm more trusting, more present, more in my power, more in like feelings of self-love. And again, this is probably then moving up towards like my areas of definition, like where I do have the identity center and the heart center defined. But when I am feeling more connected, I suppose, to those, to my true self, to those energies that are really strong in my profile, in my chart, then I suppose I'm feeling more healthy. My body just naturally kind of does seem to be healthier. And also, like when I'm detached, when I'm not so attached to things, that's when I can feel a greater sense of health and well-being. So yeah, I don't know if that really answered your question, but maybe it is just like feeling into these different energy centers and how they feel. I mean, it's interesting that the root center, where it connects up, where the spleen connects through the channel of judgment, which together we make up. So I've got is it the 58? Yeah, I've got the 58 defined on both sides. So on my design and on my personality. And I have a lot of other gates coming out of my root. So even though it's an defined center, there's a lot of pressure there. And I have really felt that pressure from other people, and that pressure to be doing, and that kind of, the pressure.
Yeah.
And it is a pressure center. Same with the crown, which I have defined. So it's, I don't know, it's all just like feeling into these different energies. But as I'm becoming more aware through what we're doing here together, this exploration, and through just experimenting with different areas, I feel like I'm becoming more aware of how those centers feel, like feeling into those energies. How about yourself?
Well, I don't have anything completely undefined. I will say that I do also have a few gates that come out of the root, so I get that pressure. But you know, I really have, I probably felt sort of some pressure to yeah. And well, out of my crown, like my head center, I would say for sure. I mean, it's I have all three of the gates defined, but it's an open center. So there's quite a bit consistency there, but I for sure know when I'm in like a mental pressure to figure things out. Like I know that, and it's just such a gift to be able to pick up on that more, because when I'm not being like when I'm not sort of like being very mindful of that, then I just, all things, system goes out of whack. But what I was also kind of wanting to share was that this is, while it's in the spleen, it has a lot of mental activity connected to it. The 18th gate is coming out of the spleen, but it has a lot of sort of connection to our mental thought patterns. And for myself, I would say that, like specifically with the spleen, again, it's been in going through a process of healing. And what I mean by that is like having to work with things that have been sort of trapped in from childhood and working through them, like being able to process them and create a different narrative of what experience that was like. And so it refers also to like people in the shadow expression can usually exhibit like a victim mentality, like a victim mind. And so I think that for me, a lot of the deconditioning that has come through the spleens is really because my health was so significantly impacted by my experiences within my relationships, within very close dynamics. And so it was almost like this initiation process of beginning to work with like it says, the gate of correction, like correcting life in a way that is ultimately going to serve myself, but really all of humanity better. Like, you know,
which is really shifting out of victim mentality, like you said. Yeah. And it made me think of like a few things came up for me, but it really made me think of this idea of judgment, and how when we're caught in this, when we're judging ourselves or reality or someone else, we can be really the victim of our circumstances, because we feel like things are happening to us, not for us.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about a lot of the mindfulness teachings that I've learned and been practicing myself, and been teaching myself around judgment and this idea of non-judgment. And it's interesting because I have this open, I wonder if this is a space of wisdom for me, and which is why I'm able to kind of teach this idea of non-judgment. And it makes me think of the purpose of judgment, because so my partner, my husband, Alex, has this whole channel, the channel of judgment. And since I've been reading over the last couple of days about it, we've been talking about it a little bit and talking about the purpose of judgment. And it's so funny because he can be really judgmental. And he knows this, like he's aware of this, but it really is because he sees what things are not serving people and what people could be doing better that could improve their lives. And he's a personal trainer. So he's really into health and fitness and helping people to, he's also a fifth line. He's a 3/5 manifestor. So he's really into helping people to improve their lives and to be healthier but often he can be in his shadow when he's in a bit more of a shadow frequency. He can be quite judgmental. And I feel like often I'm picking him up on that and being like, I'm able to see why people might have fallen into those unhealthy patterns, or like have that kind of self-compassion or that compassion, for other people, and what might have kind of led them to fall into those patterns. And I often find myself saying things like, oh, you never know what someone's been through, or that kind of thing. And so it's just really interesting, the balance and the we together, Alex and I also make up this channel. So yeah, like this idea of non-judgment, but it's not in a way of dismissing the judgment and saying that it doesn't have a purpose, but it's like disidentifying with the judgment. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because you said something about it being quite mental, and it makes me think of like meditation, when we are observing our mind and the mind's tendency to judge the present moment, or to judge the experience. We're practicing not judging the judgment. It's not necessarily saying that the judgment doesn't have a purpose. And it's really made me rethink judgment, reading this. And I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, you just kind of reminded me of like, that essentially takes us to the gift of integrity.
Yes.
Yeah. And integrity for the purpose of, for myself, like, not only can I can see what needs correcting, but like I've already referenced quite a few times, is like, I can see what needs correcting because I can see how it's needed correcting in my own life. And that sort of holds me to a standard of, kind of being like impeccable with my word of, granted, like don't always get it correct, but I think that that's the whole point of this sort of energy, is that recognizing that even if we strive for perfection and maybe on a mental, physical plane don't get that frequency speaking, like we are perfect. And so this integrity is like setting the standard for itself, like not necessarily embodying or relating this thing that needs correcting for no reason. It's like, no, I've done it myself. Like, I know. And then therefore like can uphold other people to that standard. Not saying that mine's the only one that's correct or anything like that, but I think through experimentation and trial and error and, just seeing what fits and what doesn't, what's working and what's not, then, you get to decide for yourself. And there was something that I was gonna say with that, but it left. So yeah.
It might come back.
It might, yeah.
If it does, speak up. Yeah.
It usually does.
It makes me think of, again, this idea of service. What is serving you? What is no longer serving you? And the purpose of judgment being improvement, like to see what isn't serving in order to let it go, in order to improve, to be these higher, better versions of ourselves. And so it's a really like interesting kind of, I often think about these little tweaks. It's like a tweak in frequency or energy, because like when it's being overly critical and judgmental, it's in a way not really serving, because it might not be influencing people in the way that it could be more effective. Whereas if it's like in a healthier expression to encourage the self or the person to improve and to work on themselves, and to like be critical of the things that aren't serving them, to kind of decipher what's not in service, it moves into this higher frequency. Yeah.
You reminded me of how it's a projected channel. So it's the reason, I think, why like, let's take, for Alex, for example, right? I think that the reason why he can give his judgments about what's working for somebody physically or not is because essentially they're calling him out on wanting to know. And that's something that it's referred to as like, if I were to just go and like share my opinion with somebody, my thought of like what's not working for them, it's not going to land. And that's because it's a projected channel. So that's why essentially, like, if you're coming to me, most people book a session. That's like my invitation to go ahead and give them my feedback or my insight of what I'm witnessing. And, that's why it's taken. And sometimes, it's not, but essentially, whether it's in profession or not in profession, just life experience has taught me that things land better when I either ask if somebody wants my feedback on something, or if somebody's asking me for my feedback on something, or, my thoughts. So yeah, that's just, I think, something to play with when you do have this gate. I've been thinking lately, like, okay, what are like the practical ways that we can actually play with the different gates and energies, and kind of, I know they say sometimes like pick a gate or pick a center and kind of just like let that be your focus for some time. And I haven't necessarily done that. Maybe like once. I think I did that with the 5th gate, my sun gate. But for this one, I mean, I have practiced with this. I mean, I work in a profession that my opinion is asked, my feedback is asked for. But in my personal life, I would say that if there's something that I feel I really would like to share with somebody, with holding like this space for that and a sense of integrity with it all, I ask, I just simply ask, like, I have something that I'd like to share with you. Are you open to hearing it?
Well, you're actually informing as well. And that's interesting, like an interesting little dynamic, because I've played with this myself a little bit, having so much projected energy in my chart, but also being a manifestor, like, so playing with this idea of informing, like, I have some thoughts, if you'd like me to share them, I have some advice I could give or something, and then seeing if it's invited out of you. Please tell me, I'd love to hear that. Just little kind of hacks that you can use as a manifestor or a projector, I suppose. In inviting, I think this was something that Nikki taught me, our human design teacher, was you can't really lose if you inform, but it's inviting an invitation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I have some thoughts on that, and then you wait for someone to say, oh, please tell me. Like, you can't really lose. But I'm really glad you mentioned opinions. You said something about opinions, and that's the programming partner of the 18th, is the 17th, which we explored last week, which is the gate of opinions. So they're so interconnected, like judgment and opinions. And really, really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. It's I think it's fun when you come across a gate or an energy that you have like defined in your chart, and you sort of see like how it's played out throughout your life. This one was one of them for me. Like reading it, I felt like I was reading my life story without any of the details.
Yeah. I really feel that with most of the ones that, I mean, that I have defined particularly.
Mhm.
And if I'm like, oh, I don't know if that really resonates, sometimes that's a little clue that there's some work to be done, some deconditioning. I just think about when I first heard about my personality sun gate and being all about loving the body. And I was like, oh, I've had a lot of body image issues throughout my life. That's been a big theme for me. And so that was in a way an invitation into actually looking at those shadows around body image. So yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say.
I'm wondering if you have anything else you want to share about this gate or this energy or.
Yeah, no, I think it's been pretty personal, I would say, that's for sure. So it's been fun, like I said, to kind of look back and reflect. And now I feel like I would just really being open to seeing how to work with each gate as we go through them, like especially the ones that might be defined in my chart, like, okay, like how can I like tap into this more? And I would say I feel like the 18th I've tapped into quite a bit. So but not consciously, it's not like, and it's funny because that would make sense because it's in my design side. So it is like in the unconscious side. And I didn't, it's not like I knew that that's what I was doing in all those years before coming across like the language of all of this, that I've had some of these just understandings, but I didn't know how real this experience actually is, of like holding this sense of integrity ultimately for like service.
And service to yourself and the other.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
This spilled coffee really took us to some place, so
Yeah.
thanks.
I want to look up my line of 58 that connects it. Well, it's like I said before, I've got it on both sides. I've got a 2 and a 5, 58.2, 58.5. Shall I read it?
Read it. Let's hear it.
I know we're not at the 58, but.
So, who cares?
Okay, line 5 is defense, the natural and practical instinct to protect oneself regardless of temptations, the fuel for self-defense regardless of stimulations. Okay. And then the 2 is perversion, no polarity, no exaltation. A genius for perverse stimulation that afflicts oneself. The energy which fuels the drive for perverse stimulation. What do you reckon that means?
Honestly, I did see the word perverse, and I'm honestly not sure what that word means.
No. Okay. I'll have to have
more to come.
That later.
Yeah. For sure.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing all your insights. It's really, it sounds like this has been a really personal experience for you.
Oh, for sure. And if anybody has the 18 defined or even undefined, but you're working relationship with it, we'd love to hear it. So share it with us on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. It's created us a beautiful TikTok. So yes, we're TikTok. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, guys, take care.
Take care. Bye.